Good morning and welcome to the Architectural Review Board hearing of Thursday, August 29th. May I have a roll call, please?
Chair Malone Pritchett.
Present.
Vice Chair Liebert.
Present.
Board Member Liu.
Present.
Board Member Pop.
Present.
Thank you.
There are no members of the public present, so there will be no public oral communications. All right, no minutes, no agenda changes, additions, or deletions. So I think actually what we do want to do is make one agenda change. Let's switch items number 2 and number 1. So we'll start with number 2. Recap of the ARB Council joint meeting. A discussion regarding 1. Council's August 19, 2013 directive to develop specific recommendations to address concerns regarding sidewalk widths, and 2. Modifications to the El Camino Real guidelines. I understand staff will have some comments to make, but let's start with some ARB comment, and this is just a study session, so there'll be some back and forth. I did want to try to frame this discussion a little bit. Council really asked us to come back with some firm recommendations. They indicated they're not interested in additional study and long drawn-out process here. They're looking for some quick fixes. So I would propose that we should look at this in 2 ways. First of all, develop a list of problems that need to be addressed, because it's a little bit amorphous right now. So if we can come up with a few specific items that need to be handled, that would be great. And then second, come up with some solutions that specifically address those problems. Obviously, we won't necessarily come up with all those today, but if we can start to form a framework for our next meeting, that would be great. And we're going to keep this item on the agenda every meeting until we've got it done. So, Randy, you said you had some things you'd like to say.
Sure. I'm happy to jump in a little bit. First I want to just note that I'm appreciative of the time that we spent with council. I thought it was very helpful. I enjoyed the conversation, and I thought the dialogue was quite productive. And in particular, I'll focus on Mayor Scharf's comment that he really wants results, and I'm fond of that. So let's do that. I'd like to, Claire, I like what you're describing in terms of the 2 different things that we need to approach. But I think we really do need to study it just briefly before we take some action. And I think that one of the things that I spent some time looking at this week was just sort of working my way down El Camino, looking at all of the different zones, the different nodes, and what the specific zoning is along the street. And I think one of the things that would be very helpful is if we could perhaps ask staff to get us a diagram or a drawing that has all of El Camino strung together. I'm looking at each of the individual zoning maps and switching back and forth between them, but it would be really helpful to have that whole band of El Camino from one end of Palo to the other with the parcel zoning. Maybe, I don't want to go too far here, but if it could be color-coded, that would be great. Because what I'm thinking is that we'll generate a list of problems and specific issues that we need to see how to address with some solutions. But I think that the very quick thing that occurred to me is that we can really designate by node, different approaches. And I think they're very much tied to the zoning that exists within those areas. And there might be one specific approach for a combination of CS and CN. There might be a very different approach for the parcels that are R-zoned parcels that touch El Camino. And it would be very easy, I think, for us to make some quick recommendations for one versus the other and treat it that way. And then I think that while that might be a fairly conservative approach and to enact those things rapidly and do that, I think I am still in favor of studying this a little bit. I'm appreciative of the idea that we should put a Band-Aid on this quickly and try and resolve it so that we don't lose any opportunity that we might have. But perhaps with a 6-month revert or revisit, or a 12-month revert or revisit that's tied to it, so that we are forced to really study this and make sure that we're doing it the right way and that we haven't missed something.
I think that's a great idea. That would be a very useful tool for all of us. And I agree. I'm not happy about just doing something quick and walking away. So I like building in some kind of a revert timeline. And Amy, was there anything you wanted to say regarding we've switched items 1 and 2. So is there anything you wanted to say about that? If not, we'll just keep talking.
About the item 2, sorry. I think there's a lot of things competing for staff's attention right now. We had a meeting last night with the Planning Commission, and it's interesting. I might suggest seeing a copy of this annual report. I can get copies of you that Chair Martinez prepared. And in it, he does mention, the work that the ARB and the Planning Commission have done together, including the El Camino and the sidewalk discussion. But there's a lot of political and interest in dealing with the situations we find ourselves in, traffic and parking, and and we do have a lot of development walking in the door. So things are going to be quite busy, and this is only one of many items. So I'm not sure timing-wise, how fast we're going to proceed on this. I'd like to say we can do everything in good timing, but I'm not sure I can commit to that.
I understand. At this point, we've only asked staff to put together a map which may already exist in one of the many documents. I seem to remember there was a consultant who did a report about El Camino and connectivity to Alma Street, which may include the map we're asking for.
There were a number of maps related to the study of the Caltrain high-speed rail that focused on what's going on with El Camino with the nodes, and so I'm sure we can come up with one.
Or perhaps even farther back, there was a discussion with council about, if I remember right, there were 12 parcels that were being considered for changing from something to CS or CN. This was about the time the Palo Bowl project was first starting, is when I recall that. So it was around '08, something like that. And I remember seeing a map of all of El Camino with all of its zoning, and that's probably close enough for what we're trying to do here.
So we will be respectful of staff's time, and there'll be some homework for the ARB members, which I think we've got a willing group here. Okay. Lee, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was thinking actually along the same lines as Randy. I was thinking that the task, first of all, the task will take the amount of time given it. So whether they say we want you to come back in a month, or whether they want us to come back in 3 months or 6 months or before the end of the year, the task will take the amount of time that you give it. It's sort of the Steve Jobs effect. But what I was going to suggest is perhaps in establishing a work plan for this is for us to break up into groups of 2. Of course, we have a new member who will be joining us shortly. But what I thought is if we broke up El Camino Real into a number of nodes the way Randy has described, it could be El Camino Way, the Fry's site and how it interfaces with El Camino Real, maybe the Cal Ave, maybe the hotel zone, and have each of these groups look at only 1 or 2 of these sites, so we're able to mix members and then report back to the group on how they see those areas and what the remedies are, because it's so diverse and different along El Camino Real. It's not consistent and it's not the same. And the zoning does change along El Camino Real. And so there are opportunities to implement some aspects of what they think would be good ideas for certain areas, like, I'll just use an example, the little yellow shopping center, down on El Camino, almost by Los Robles, that area there. but it can look at the adjacent properties as well as the hotels that are across the street and come up with some sort of ideas as to what would be appropriate for that area. And then another group can take a look further down. And then that way we've sort of broken up the task. The other approach might be to actually have it be one ARB member and maybe 2 planning commissioners per group. Have some dialogue with the planning commission so that we're not doing all this work and then bringing it forward to the planning commission and they look at it and they look at it from a totally different way. So I think that would probably help facilitate this, maybe by breaking it up into groups. I'm mindful of what Amy had said with regard to staff time. Maybe it's something that Amy would be able to allocate one staff planner per group or node to work with these teams, and thereby, breaking up the task within the planning department. So that's sort of my thought as to how we can sort of jumpstart this. As far as reporting back every meeting, I think once a month, because we really need to have something to report back on. And just to put it on the agenda, to have it on the agenda, I think there's going to be slippage by doing that.
Well, I was thinking of keeping it on the agenda so we always have the opportunity to report. If it happens that the task is so big and we don't have anything to report, then we'll continue it.
Right, but by putting it on the agenda, what happens is people go, oh, we'll wait until the next time it's on the agenda. Rather than if you put it on once a month, it makes it compelling and something that we're focused in on, and we have a deadline to report progress. So
I think the council has given us clear direction that they are looking for results, and it's our job to keep the pressure on and make this happen and resolve it quickly. I just want to comment, Lee, I think what you're describing is great, and would you see that culminating in maybe a ARB PTC charrette where we all come together?
It's a good question. I think if we're working together with other commission members, like Planning Commission, I think for one of us to report back to our group and one of them to report back to their group is the way to do it. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the development regulations or the ideas and say this is what our vision is for this one particular area, and share it with colleagues and begin to get a sense of consensus among us as to how we've applied it and whether it works or not work. So bringing the Planning Commission members back into it, well, you can have a 1-2 hour retreat, but it's not going to, I don't think it's going to bear significant fruit because you have to get agreement from everybody and everybody has to talk. So.
Yeah, I had the feeling at the council hearing that they were really specifically asking ARB for our recommendations, and I think that we definitely should include PTC, sending them regular informational bulletins, and I'm not opposed to involving PTC members if they're interested in the actual studies as well. But I agree with Lee, if we go back to the ARB PTC study session, that takes a couple of months to get set up, and that's not really what council's asking for. And our silent one.
So we haven't actually talked about the South El Camino guidelines themselves, and I think we were going to try to do that actually at the retreat. But I mean, there are things there that to me are missing that should be in there that aren't, and so I think like looking at all of these areas and the zoning is fine too. But I think that I think we should actually just look at that document as well. I generally don't find it that helpful when on some of the really complicated projects. Or if we have a project, some big hotel with a huge portico share and the entrance is on the side, it doesn't really have any, doesn't provide any guidance whatsoever about excuse me, how to handle that kind of situation. And so, and I don't know if any, and I think those are very difficult situations. I don't know of other kind of documents that other cities have adopted that have actually can help with that. I've been looking. And I think I didn't discuss this during the council meeting, but one of the reasons why all the entrances are sort of on the sides of the buildings, not on the front. I'm thinking of like the Palo Alto Bowl Hotel and like the Elks Club Lodge. It's because everybody still wants to have everything oriented towards the car, right? So if you can't put like the driveway in the front of the building on El Camino, but you can put it on the side, then they're going to put the entrance on the side. And so there's still it's still fairly automobile oriented, and it's not clear to me, if we're actually saying to completely break that, like parking is completely separate and the entrance, is on El Camino, and it's more traditional, and you separate the parking from the building. And so I think that's all that I have. I think I think we should just, there's so many projects coming through this year, and this has been sort of on the radar map for months. I think we should just push through and just get it done, because before you know it, it's going to be, New Year's.
You're right. It's going to take a while if we don't push it through. We've all been talking about El Camino Real. This was also a discussion of sidewalk widths or the sidewalk experience in other areas as well, so let's not lose sight of that. El Camino is certainly a big project to tackle, but we've also got this other thing. So I think in the interest of moving this forward, maybe we could at least start to identify a couple of areas that we'd like to look at, as teams of one or two, teams of two, just to get started so we have something to sink our teeth into. So I don't know if anybody has a particular area of El Camino and or the sidewalk issues that they want to jump into.
So maybe they just align, but I think what might make sense to do is to divide it up by zoning versus by area, and to look at how are we going to treat the CNCS parcels, how are we going to treat the R parcels, how are we going to treat other things, look at it that way, because I think this, and we haven't discussed this, but that's sort of my vision of where this might go, is that we're going to make some rules for these different types of zones and go forward with that. And it seems to me that rather than trying to study kind of this California Avenue area, we might say within this area there are, it's predominantly actually CS or CN in that particular node. But the fringes of that start to change, and I can see us looking at this by zone, and maybe one group takes one set of zones and another group takes another set of zones. Or we could look at it by nodes so that we get this sort of continuity along El Camino and different things don't happen right next to each other. I mean, I can sort of see it either way, and I just wanted to bring that up and see if that is a way to organize it, or if you'd prefer to just sort of take sections of El Camino and do it that way.
Yeah, I wanted to put a dose of reality into this, and part of the reality is the existing zoning that's there. By having each of the teams or each of the groups work on specific sections, they're working in a variety of different zone types. So they're able to see how the rules apply or how the rules would work in one zone versus another zone. The other thing that makes it completely I guess, again, the complexion changes so drastically along El Camino Real. There are lots of little parcels, and then there are other parcels which are larger. There are parcels that are that butt up to the R1 zone. There are other parcels that don't. They butt up to an industrial zone. There are parcels that have vacant or abandoned alleyways behind them. So it becomes, and when you get down to El Camino Way, it's an anomaly by itself because it's actually an island that's not very deep. So it allows for to be very precise in terms of what's being recommended for specific nodes along El Camino Real. In the end, the tool that I think we could probably wind up using is something like an overlay for each of those. So in other words, we could have the same zoning type exist on different parts of El Camino Real, but we can use the overlay tool to control what's going on within a specific node.
That's an interesting approach that may well work. In the spirit of getting back to defining the problem, I like the idea of looking at what the existing zoning is and what some of the issues are that come out of those zones, either in a node-by-node area or overall. I'm interested to hear how you guys might want to break that up, but I think that would be a good first step, is to say, CN happens, because of CN we get this, this, and this that we don't want. And because of CS zoning we get this, this, and this that we don't want.
Sure.
Amy?
I might add, and we'd be happy on staff to, we can coordinate if we can get a meeting that happens at City Hall if it makes it easy, and then staff can be there to help with, specific examples of projects. Myself, Russ, could be helping with that effort with specific examples. And, if you, let's say, were to go with nodes, quarters, teams, or whatever, then the nodes team, we would identify those addresses and what projects have happened in those nodes. And then, this is an example. And then we'd have, maybe have a planner assigned to that team, and then another planner, I'll just say Russ and I for now, to help out with, help with specific documentation of what you might need to have that, come up with some discussion there.
That sounds great. I was going to suggest, again, just in the interest of moving this forward, that we don't have to be totally democratic about this. And if you're okay with it, I would suggest, since we don't have the map in front of us today, as soon as we get that, if you're okay with it, just chop it up into the pieces you think are appropriate, and staff can email that around so that we don't have issues. And let's just pick some teams and go at it. I think it's less important who gets which piece as it is to just get them all and get it done.
That's fine with me, unless any members have a particular area they're interested in.
Well, I was going to suggest, I know El Camino Real fairly intimately. I think we drive on it all the time. I mean, one clear area is the El Camino Way, Triangle Island area, and the hotels that are adjacent to it. The only question is whether we want to look at that and the hotels, that are just north of that separately. Then the other area that I can think of off the top of my head is the El Camino Real out by the Fry's site there, where Portage hits El Camino Real, and there are a number of things that happen along there all the way up to Page Mill Road. And then the third zone that I can think of is where El Camino Real and Cal Ave, hit, and there's definitely some opportunity there because of its location and proximity to the transit center. And the only other area that I can think of is possibly south of San Antonio Road, but then you begin to get into Mountain View, and I don't know how far south we can really go there.
It is Palo Alto, though, and I think there's only four of us, and there's a stretch of El Camino, and we should just
There's 5 of us.
we're 5 of us, 4 of us today, soon to be 5, and I think we need to just break it up and take it apart and put it back together. And my sense is that I'll get to comment on everything because we're going to come back together and talk about it. And so it's less important to me what piece I take initially. I'd rather just get the process going. And I think that if we might say that we take the southernmost point of Palo Alto all the way to the far side of El Camino Way, and then from there to Page Mill, and from Page Mill to just the other side of Cal Ave, where it starts to become kind of residential, and then from there to the north end of Palo Alto. Maybe it's those 4 segments, something like that, and we take 2 and 2, or I don't know how we do it, but I don't want to make it complicated. I think and I'm not suggesting anyone is, but I just think there's a simple way to approach this thing and take it apart and put it back together, and we should just do that.
So what I'll do is I'll pick an arbitrary center line after taking a quick look at the zoning map, and one group gets the north end and one group gets the south end. And I think by doing that, there'll be a couple of interesting nodes in each one of the groups.
If that overlap, there doesn't have to, because we're working independently, there could even be overlap.
That's true, and nothing is to stop members of one group from commenting on stuff on the other side if they find something interesting. And I'm going to ask everybody to look at the sidewalk experience as well. Regarding the 4 or 5 members, we have 4 members now. Robert Guyer believes he's going to be able to start at the meeting of was it the 18th or the 19th of September. He thinks he'll be able to start on that one. He said there's a possibility he'll have a conflict. So he's not going to be up to speed on this for at least a couple of weeks. But we'll feed him in as soon as he's ready. Anybody else have anything to say about this topic?
I thought a little bit more about the idea of having something maybe joint with the Planning Commission, and where I think it would really pay off is if maybe we had a kickoff meeting and it was done as building on what Randy was saying earlier, which was some sort of a charrette or workshop. So what we would be able to do is take El Camino Real, break it up the way, however that we decide, have the planning commissioners be there, do it maybe on a Saturday where we've got a large chunk of time, and just work on those nodes together as teams, but not really do anything in terms of reporting to the whole group, or maybe just do something very cursory in terms of reporting to the group, and then bringing it back to each of the individual bodies to begin to flush it out, or the teams could work even more on it and before bringing it back to the group.
So again, in the interest of time, I'd rather not have that be a kickoff because it'll take some time to get that scheduled.
Only 21 days.
But after, if we've done some homework, I think that can be a much more useful exercise.
Okay.
So what are our action items leaving this meeting before our next time we get together?
So I'd say our action items leaving this meeting would be for everybody to review CN and CS zoning and start to think about the things that you don't like about them, or opportunities. And also to come up with some more thoughts on sidewalk experience. And
Right, going back to what is the list of problems? I think we should each generate
Yes.
what we think the list of problems is. So
that'd be great, and we can maybe fine tune that list.
Get one
of
big
next
list
one.
together.
Mhm.
So as the groups go apart, we can make sure we all have those in mind.
We'll have the same list in mind, and more problems may come up as a result of
I'm sure
deeper
they will.
study. And then my homework is to work with staff to break us into teams and send out assignments.
I might suggest our next meeting, September 19th, as you might imagine, is more than full now with, projects walking in the door. And so I'm wondering the next time we meet on this is probably going to be October, unless there's a special meeting that we can target as a group. So we'll probably, if we want to do that, we'll need to look into a meeting date.
Well, let's take a quick look at meeting dates, although I did hear from the corner we're willing to stay long, and I would agree. I'm willing to do a longer meeting to do this. I think our next meeting, where we're just identifying the problems list, will be fairly quick, so I don't think it needs a special meeting.
And perhaps even if we can circulate it in advance through staff, we can expedite that discussion.
So for Brown Act reasons, everything would go directly to staff. You would collate and then send it out. Okay. Any follow-up comments? No? Okay. So to the next item, which was item number 1, downtown context discussion. And I believe this is a description of staff's efforts towards review of a downtown cap and parking issues.
Yes, Stephen Turner is on his way. There's been an unfortunate accident this morning, and I think traffic is a bit messed up. There was another fatality on Caltrain. I heard on my radio as I was driving in Charleston. So I'm not sure, but he is on his way to help with this item. Aaron was not able to be here this morning. But yeah, we are working with, I think, the Diet and Bocce, I believe, is going to be hired with council approval in the coming weeks to help us with the downtown cap study. So we did this RFP to set up a consultant to help study the whole area. You know, there's been lots of talk of residential permit parking, kind of this problem of, you squeeze it here and it goes over there with parking, so you have to kind of look at it very holistically over a wide area, because once you start saying you can't park here, then the problem gets pushed over. The other thing is we're looking at taking a close look at all of the code sections regarding, bonus area exceptions, all of that. And so, you wouldn't be surprised to see, hearings being scheduled to have sessions on that, examine our existing codes with respect to, what's exempt from providing parking. So let's see. Stephen has been assigned to work on that downtown cap study, and that, of course, relates as well to. I thought maybe that was him walking in the door. That relates to, things kind of got going with that 27 University study that was being done, and then it was said, well, what is downtown? Downtown is defined as the parking assessment district, but really, it starts to bleed out, and so the wider area does need to be studied. We're also doing studies. We've had plans drawn up for various parking lots, city public parking lots, and as far as designing, building more structures. I mean, we've been collecting money through these parking in lieu fees and, other impact fees, citywide transportation impact fees, this kind of thing. And so there is, a plan to, at some point, construct, and, hopefully sooner rather than later, another garage or two. So they're right now looking at different sites. And so probably it would benefit if we can get some of those plans into for a study session with Jaime and take a look. I'm not sure what the timing is on that, but I've seen some plans that might be of interest to the board. Was there any questions that I might be able to answer to the best of my ability on this topic? who are members of the public. We have been, just last night we got lots of, we had the transportation element on the Planning Commission agenda, and so there's lots of email. We're getting lots of email from lots of sources regarding parking and traffic. It's the hot topic, circulation, parking, traffic. So there's lots of material that we have to work with as far as people's anecdotal experiences and lay studies that are out there. And then, of course, we're taking on this study, professionally prepared effort.
I have a question for you, Amy. So the comprehensive plan mentions the downtown cap, and it says when we reach a certain threshold, then we have to start examining this. And so we were saying we're at that.
Yeah, so
threshold.
the cap itself is referenced as 350,000 square feet. So that's the cap at which, I think we anticipated that we would have been here by now, before now.
Right.
So it's kind of amazing it took this long to get there, being that was set in motion many years ago. So we are at the 200, the 2/3 of the way there. Okay. And at that point it says do a study. If we were at 350, there'd be a moratorium already in place. But, excuse me, we are, on all points on the parking situation. For instance, the SOFA code does reference, kind of the need for residential permit parking. Even back in the early 2000s, we were identifying that as a concern and a need. Because there are transferable development rights that are allowed in SOFA. You can transfer them out of SOFA into downtown. Can't transfer development rights. You have to keep them in SOFA if you're. Anyways, I'm off topic, but basically, there's a lot of not just the zoning code. There's the SOFA code. There's having to do a lot of outreach with the neighbors and the business community on how to deal with the parking restrictions that people are clamoring for, and then there's always the other side of but don't want to pay for it kind of thing. So yeah.
And then just in terms of the process, then that's like a comp plan. Eventually, it would be like a comp plan amendment in whatever zoning revisions. I mean, I was just thinking in terms of process.
Yeah, I don't think we're looking at a comp plan amendment right now. I mean, we are updating the comprehensive plan elements. The transportation element is one of those, and there's policies, and we should provide copies to you of the draft that the Planning Commission saw last night. It was continued to a date certain, which is going to come back on October 9th with changes that were mentioned last night. But certainly, the focus with the community and those that are looking at creating policy regarding parking, are wrestling with things. Because, in the comp plan, certainly there's statements that say you should meet all the parking for your site. And then there's other statements that say you should have shared joint use parking to limit the amount of traffic that is coming in to park in those spaces. So we have this conundrum that you wrestle with policy, and then we have the code. So I think the code is where the zoning code is where the ARB, sees the projects because they're coming in working with that existing codes and how we interpret those and how they're going to apply going forward. That's kind of where we're going to be meeting up.
And then do we have a projection of when we think we're going to reach the cap? And we were thinking this is like 10 years or 5 years.
Oh, the cap?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, I know this is you can't.
Yeah.
I realize that's not I'm not asking you for anything.
No, it's not scientific.
Saying
there's not a definite date. But, I think everyone, with when the codes were written and how much, it's surprising that we have not reached it already. But we are at that 2/3 mark for sure with all the approved development. Many of the projects that have been approved have not come in, and started building it. So obviously there's a lag time there where we have a little luxury of time before those buildings are built and the demand is there, the additional demand. So time is of the essence, and hopefully we'll come back with you another day when we have more to report.
Lee?
The purview of the board is really to look at quality and character issues, and we have our standards for review here. And it's very troublesome and very difficult for me when members of the public come in here and they demand that we not approve a project based on criteria that's not within our purview. And I realize that the public hearing is a particularly important part of this process and hearing them out. And what it does is it just leaves me in a point of frustration. I'm not able to deny a project. In fact, I am required to review the project on the criteria that's our standards of review. And then I just feel very frustrated by what they are telling me. And I don't have any ability to react or help them or even be sympathetic, to what they're asking for, because it's not within our purview. And I think a perfect example of that is the Roth building that has been slated to become a museum. And I think when I was on the Planning and Transportation Commission, I had identified that by it being a museum, the parking load was much less than what the underlying zoning was, which was a public facility. If that had been used as city offices, for instance, it would have required even more parking and would have been a bigger impact on the SOFA neighborhood. So I just wish there was some way that staff would be able to work with these applicants and let them know that this is either not the appropriate forum. They're more than welcome to voice their concerns, but it's very difficult for us to be able to take action based on parking alone.
Right. Lee, you said staff would work with the applicants, but I think you mean staff would work with the public. Is that
I'm
right?
sorry, yeah, the public and applicants too, in trying to help them find their way in the right forum. By the same token, they have the ability to appeal whatever our recommendation is and actually bring it before the city council. It would be a shame if all the projects went that way, because what would happen is that it would eventually fall on deaf ears in the city council. It would, it appears on consent calendar. City council will eventually say, well, we can't hold up all these projects. But if there was some way to facilitate, or work with members of the public, I think it would be be great.
If I can just jump in again. There has been an appeal, as you are aware, of the building across the street at 240 Hamilton. It's on the consent calendar for September 9th, and they may pull it and schedule a hearing, and the topics are architecture and parking, basically. And so I think we've got other projects that have come through that haven't been appealed, surprisingly, because of the clamoring that's going on. Surprising that we haven't had more, but there is one that's on the docket for September 9th. And it'll be interesting to see what comes of that, because certainly there are people hearing and listening to the crowd about this issue of parking and traffic. So, yeah. So, whether staff can address it fully, or it needs to be a council policy top down. I mean, we're working at all of these ends. I think staff is tasked with looking at some things, and so those will be rising up, and then council is addressing it in their own way. Whether they're going to pull the item or not would be an expression of council if they want to talk about something in particular.
I just want to say something here, and this is just me, okay? I've been doing this for almost 16 years now, and to have a member of the public come forward with such vehemence and to be threatened by them, just makes me want to resign from this board and not participate in city life. You have to have people that are willing to sit on this board. But the bile and vitriol that is given from some people is really difficult to take, and if they're going to continue with their threats, I just don't want any part of it, and let the city fall into a complete and total jumble of, have stuff done at staff level. But I don't like it, and I'm always cordial to people and listening to what they have to say. I'm respectful, and I'm willing to meet with members of the public as well as applicants away from this forum. But to hear that, it really upsets me.
So I think it's just a matter of getting the word out to the public as to what the best forum is for them to have their concerns heard. While they're perfectly able to come and speak here, it's a public forum, we're not able to make any changes to the parking regulations at ARB. So if you can get that word out somehow, who they need to talk to in order to have their concerns heard. Any others? Yep.
I've only been doing this for less than a year now. And I have to say, one of the things that has been most challenging for me in this is when people come forward and they speak to us about things which we have no ability to react about, things that are outside of our purview. And I have thought about this a bit, and what I'd like to suggest, if it's possible, please, is to have staff work with our city attorney's office and develop some type of response that could be sent to to a member of the public when they send in a letter to the Architecture Review Board, which clearly has content on which we have no ability to respond. They need to understand that it's not something we can react to. Because the thing that is challenging for me in this is that I want to be responsive to the public. I want to be the representative that I need to be. And when I'm unable to respond, I feel like I'm letting people down. And it's difficult. And so if we could find a way to filter some of these comments rather than just passing them through, and if there's a standard response that can be prepared. So somebody reads those letters, they realize what's there, they send a response back. I'm respectful of the public's time. I mean, it takes time to come to these meetings in the middle of the day and not be at work, and I don't want them to waste their time. I want them to go to the place where it can be most beneficial for the project, for them, for everyone involved. And to come here with many of the things that we hear beyond being difficult for us is really just a waste of time. And I'd prefer all around to avoid that. So if you can look into that, Amy, that would be great.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing this forward. I'm interested to hear what comes of the PTC hearings on the comp plan. So we'll next move to item number 3. I am recused on this item because I am a member of the project team. So I'll be turning it over to Lee. Before I leave the room, Lee has pointed out that at that city council on September 9th, it would be a good idea to send an ARB rep in case the council pulls it. I was wondering whether any of the board members are particularly interested in being that rep. Okay. Lee has volunteered, so Lee will be the rep. Thanks, Lee.
Is that going to be heard that evening, or will it be discussed at a future meeting?
Possibly both. If there are 3 members of the council that pull the item, they can discuss a certain amount of the project. They can't hear any new testimony or whatever that night. So it would just mean, they can consider scheduling a hearing. They can talk about some of the facts of the case. And they can hear, if they do pull it, to discuss whether to schedule for hearing. There can be some testimony because it's on the agenda. So.
Are they going to require or need anything from the ARB?
Yeah, I suspect we'll know more next week.
Okay.
Whether there's the 3 votes to pull, or if it seems like something's going that way, we won't know for sure, obviously. But to know certainly the agenda size will make a difference as to whether anything happens that night. Okay. And I suspect that it's too big of an agenda for them to actually handle it that night.
Okay, thank you, and I'll see you next time.
Okay. So with that, we will move on to continued business, major reviews. 3159 El Camino Real, request by FGY Architects on behalf of Portage Avenue Portfolio LLC for site and design review of demolition of a X square foot, a new 70, what's X square foot? You're supposed to put a number in there?
I think it was the WeFix Max store. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure what that number is. I think it was a few.
Okay. A new 74,122 square foot, 4-story mixed-use project with 48 residential units. The proposal also includes design enhancement exceptions for height and build-to lines, as well as a conditional use permit for the parcel to exceed 5,000 square foot limit for office space. Environmental assessment, a negative declaration has been prepared in accordance with the California Environmental Quality Act, Zone District Service Commercial CS. And with that, would staff like to introduce the project?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Vice Chair, Lippert, and board members. The board has seen this project in its first formal review previously on August 1st. The board had a number of items that they wanted the applicant to come back with. They continued the item to August 15th, but it wasn't enough time to prepare, so here we are on the 29th to review those items. I'm going to go ahead and list the items that the board had requested the applicant to come take a look at and come back with, and then just briefly describe how the applicant responded, and then the applicant will go into much greater detail about all the changes they've made since you last saw it. So the board had requested that the applicant review the landscape plan for overall design and wayfinding. They asked that the applicant clarify the traffic ingress and egress points and evaluate the locations carefully in relation to deliveries, move-ins, move-outs, and visitors. Asked that the applicant look at providing private open spaces, balconies at all of the residential units. If you remember, there are 48 units and 3 of them in their prior application did not have a private balcony. Review the privacy walls and railings at the balconies and develop them further. Include in the conditions of approval restrictions on the storage of items on the balconies. Review the wall at the trash enclosure on Portage Avenue side of the project. Provide specifics for material placement and clearly identify these on the drawings. Review the Acacia Avenue corner for design and consider reorganizing the plan. Consider sidewalk width along El Camino Real relative to the recent council direction. So the applicant has come back with a number of changes to the plan. They have redesigned the landscape plan to better fit in with the architectural design. The triangles have been removed, and we have more of a grid pattern relating to the rectangular architecture of the building. Site access. They talked about there was some confusion about what your comment meant. Could be on staff's part, could be on the applicant's part, but In their response, they talked about queuing at the portage entries, and I believe they were going to go back and look at the questions about how deliveries and move-ins and things are handled. So they should cover that in their presentation. The private balconies, the ARB had requested that the applicant look at a way to provide those additional balconies for those 3 units. And so they've taken a look at that, and we've got a new balcony at one of the units, but there's still 2 units that don't have a private balcony, primarily for architectural reasons in terms of how it would impact the design of the project. They have gone back and taken another look at the partitions between the private spaces on the balconies, and have redesigned the partitions that separate those. There will be a condition of approval related to what can be stored on the balconies to prevent bikes and other things from being stored out there and creating kind of a visual concern. They have redesigned the wall on Portage where the trash enclosure used to be. It used to be a very large, wide, roll-up metal door, and they've reoriented and kind of separated the trash such that the door is now facing, not facing the street, and faces the surface parking area underneath the building, so it's less visually obtrusive, and moved some of the recycling over so that there's a very small roll-up door, hopefully improving the elevation to your liking. They have clarified materials and coordinated those items on the drawings. They've completely modified the acacia corner. They have pushed back the retail/commercial recreation space and created another arcade that echoes the original arcade on the front of the building, creating some additional depth and pedestrian interest at that corner. The sidewalk width, related to the council memo, the applicant hasn't adjusted the location of the building relative to the sidewalk. It currently meets the zoning standard, and there are so many elements in this project that speak to moving the building away so that you don't have that large single facade on El Camino, that it wasn't really necessary just to shove the building back, because there's so many ways that the building actually does flow across the frontage, where we have these 2 arcades where the building is actually set back quite a bit further than from the curb. And there's the raised plaza, there's the entry portico, and the upper floors are also set back, so they didn't feel the need to just shove the building back. Hopefully they feel that with all the different design elements kind of creating a more open and pedestrian-friendly frontage, that the project will meet with council's approval relative to their concerns about sidewalk width. There was a number of additional plan changes that were bulleted in the staff report beyond the items that the ARB had asked the applicant to come back with, relating to some of the discussion items that the ARB had talked about. There's a new doorway in the restaurant space that actually opens up onto the courtyard, so that offers opportunities for dining and things to happen within that portico courtyard, not just in the front of the project, but also continuing around to the courtyard side. The entry to the Century Elevator Tower has been reoriented and located adjacent to the stair tower. There was concern before that the entry to the stair and the entry to the elevator were so separate that people might be a little confused, so they've tried to centralize that to help with wayfinding. The zinc panels that had previously been proposed for the Portage and Acacia stair towers have been eliminated. They're no longer going to propose that material, and they're going with the cement composite panels that was already part of the existing material palette for the project. The openings into the Acacia stair tower landings have been enlarged, and the landings at the 3rd and 4th floor are also now open to the courtyard side, and the 3rd floor terrace now connects directly to the Acacia stair tower. So at the previous hearing, there was discussion of wanting to have some kind of visibility through that element, and so they've opened that up. The Portage Avenue elevation of the residential units have been further developed to be more consistent in the use of doors, windows, and sidelights. The overall color palette, the application has decided to change the stronger red-brown color from the 3rd floor to the 4th floor, which is set back further from the street, so it kind of reduces that stronger color impression. Placed the more neutral gray color on the 3rd floor, which actually helps and responds to the gray color of the cement that's used on the 1st and 2nd floor. The wood panel color for the central stair tower has been lightened up with a more open grain pattern. So those are the changes that the applicant has made, and they're here to kind of walk you through those. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Russ. Does the architect wish to make a presentation? I think Russ has covered almost all your bases.
Actually, he has done a very thorough job of reviewing that.
You have 10 minutes, okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Heather Young from Fergus Garber Young Architects. As Russ indicated, we took the comments very seriously and have been able to make some, I think, very positive changes to the project as a result of the observations and comments that you provided. I am going to try and focus our discussion on those elements, but if there are other items that you'd like to talk about, we can always go back to that. And I would like to say that Gary Lehman from Gazzardo Gazzardo Landscape is here and has also some information to share if you'd like more in-depth information there. So, the first one was the landscape review. There had been comments about the potential for a stronger connectivity between the landscape design and the building design. And as a result, Gazzardo has gone back and revised the landscape design. Triangles are no longer a part of it, and it is a more orthogonal and rectangular approach, which, again, I think he would be in an excellent position to discuss further. There's also were questions about traffic access to the site, and I do want to make sure that the email that we sent made it to you guys. Okay, great. Because, again, there was a misunderstanding as to what the questions were. There are locations for daily deliveries from FedEx, UPS. There are mail locations already established in the Central Tower and in the Acacia Tower for USPS deliveries. The issue of moving in and out, there is a at-grade accessible ramp to a elevator off of Acacia, and that serves all 4 floors. Most of the residential units are very small. We don't anticipate large moving vehicles to bring people in or out of the building. It's possible to reserve spaces with a parking pass through the city here if there is a larger delivery. There's also a elevator connection in the below grade, and there are some non-machine parking spaces in that vicinity that could be used for ingress and egress through that central stair tower. And the other question was about visitor parking. And as I mentioned, and I think we included also some transcript notes, I hope we included some transcript notes from the PTC meeting. There had been a lot of discussion about visitor parking, and the requirement for visitor parking is not part of this project because we do fall under the state regulation for the parking assessment of the residential units. But because this is such a diverse community of people, and because there are already surface parking spaces for the commercial recreation, the retail, the restaurant spaces, those actually serve as visitor spaces, especially during the evening and weekend hours when those uses, commercial, office, restaurant, and retail, have a different time schedule. So we think there's adequate visitor parking. The next question that you had regarded the balconies for all 48 units. As you know, 45 of the 48 units were provided with balconies, some of them quite luxurious balconies. We went back and looked at the 3 units that did not have balconies, and one of them had a building code issue regarding fire separation, and our attempts to provide that one with a balcony were not, they didn't have the magnitude that you needed for that location for it to make an impact. One of them on the second floor actually would have blocked light and air into the restaurant entry off of the courtyard, and we felt very strongly that we needed to open that up as much as possible. And you'll see in the fly-through, I think, what we were talking about. But thank you very much. We were able to reorganize these 3 units on the 4th floor to this configuration. And so we were able to provide a balcony for one of the 3 units. And we didn't change the unit mix. It didn't change the square footages. It was a really great win-win. And you can also see from the plan, it helped to make it more, more uniform. It cleaned up our corridor. It's, as you know, you're moving along and things happen for reasons you're not planning. So this was a great chance for us to turn that into a really good opportunity. Another option, issue that you asked us to look at was the residential balcony design. And it's hard to tell in some of the images, but you can see here there is this is from August 1st. There was a small solid panel design adjacent to the areas. We've been able to go in and open that up so that the top portion that's adjacent to the residences is going to be a semi-transparent glass, so you'll have privacy, but you'll also not cut down on the light in the area. And I think I mentioned in the response that the fire department is requiring some balcony-to-balcony access, so we do have lower panels at the perimeter. Security is not really an issue. Anybody could climb around the railings if they chose to. We're really trying to integrate the partition design more with the wall design and to increase privacy, but not to inhibit light into the units. And there's some further examples of this on the El Camino facade that you can see as we move through. I'm going to have to get bifocals soon. The balconies to have restricted storage, I think there's a verbiage component in here which I hope will satisfy your concerns there. The next issue was the portage service elevation, which you can see here. El Camino portage, it's between the residential units, the entrance to the surface parking, and the double height retail and office corner. At that time, we had a more vertically oriented window on the 3rd floor, a more horizontally and larger louver on the 2nd floor for the mechanical, a pair of double doors for the restaurant service, and then a very wide roll-up door for the recycling and trash, and a small planter. By working with the green waste and recycology groups, we were able to split that large trash recycling room into 2 spaces and orient the trash off of the parking plaza, so that width of doorway is moved off of the portage elevation, and we changed the double doors for service into a single door. That also allowed for a much wider landscape planter at grade. The louvers have been reduced in size, and we've reoriented the 3rd floor windows to a more horizontal proportion that is in stronger agreement with the design of the wall adjacent. They're not fundamentally changing the design, but I think these minor improvements do help the overall elevation in that area.
You have 1 minute.
Oh, okay. Material notes, you can see the acacia corner was rather a big issue. We were able to set back the ground floor, as Russ mentioned, and create a double height arcade, added more sunscreens on the side. You can see the new perspective view with the setback here. You can also see the color change from the red-brown on the 3rd floor to the red-brown on the 4th floor, and now the gray on the 3rd floor. You can also see we were able to add an additional balcony on the 2nd floor here, increasing pedestrian and building relationships. There's new openings on the 3rd floor that allow visual, and on the 3rd floor a physical connection. Sorry, you can see that here with the new rendering and the new balcony. We've talked quite a bit about the improvements to the pedestrian access. It just goes on and on. I can, we both just go on and on. I think the really important things are just to look very briefly at some of the renderings. And so you're seeing the rendering for the dining terrace and the dining arcade. We relocated the stair from Acacia over to Portage here. There's now a seat bench in this area. Oh, sorry, that's a good one. You can see the landscapes more orthogonal in its design, the new doors from the restaurant to the arcade, the entrance into the lobby and elevator has been moved from here off of to the entry portal. Another perspective showing more of the life and activity there. The change of materials on the stair towers. This is the previous courtyard elevation, and the change here that you'll see again on the terrace design with the screens, the lighter wood with a more open grain, which we have a sample of here for you. And there's a.
Why don't you wrap it up? Do the fly through and wrap
Okay,
it
here's
up.
the fly through. More activity in the ECR portal. The stair tower, slight redesign there to have a better proportion for the double height ground floor space. You can see the screens on the terraces as you roll around, the increase of the planter width, and there's a new little fence screen along the dining portal there. You can see the roof screens on the terrace. And as you come by, you'll see the arcade, the new arcade on Acacia, and the new balcony on the 2nd floor. And there you are.
Thank you very much for your presentation. With that, what we'll do is we'll open the public hearing. If there are members of the public that wish to speak to this item, you may do so at this time. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing, and we will begin with Board Member Pop.
Terrific. All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate all the time you put into addressing the comments and the very detailed response. Makes it so easy to understand the process that you went through and how you got to where you are, and that's very helpful for me. I'd like to see, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask Mr. Lehman to come up and is there anything additional that you'd like to share about the landscape plan that would be beneficial for us to understand? Give you a moment to explain anything in there that you'd like to share with us, because I think that was one of the focal points of our discussion last time and something I was concerned with. So I'd love to hear what you got.
Thank you. I'd like to bring some materials up that you may want to pass around a bit.
think at its most basic kind of high level is that we were looking for a stronger integration of the landscape with the building, sort of working with the building geometry, and looking particularly at the building elevations and seeing how the planters, how the paving work in composition with the windows, and looking for opportunities to be able to increase the inside-outside sort of relationship. There was the central plaza space, which with the stair tower element, which is really quite beautiful, and we wanted to sort of use that as an inspiration for what we're seeing actually on the ground plane and within the fountain and the planter areas. So you'll see that within the paving patterns, there's connections that are made literally between the building elevation out into the landscape. One of the key features, let's see if I can navigate here. I can use this image here. One of the things we found really interesting was that in the stair tower, there's a very strong column element that occurs here that breaks up the window facade, creates a nice vertical accent piece. And we sort of took that as a band, which went through the plaza, through the redesigned fountain element here, and actually we were able to connect that all the way across to here. So it was a really nice unifying element that kind of drew that strong architectural piece and created a way of being able to help organize the landscape design. As Heather mentioned, we've looked really carefully at how all these outdoor spaces are populated and kind of, again, let the function of how these buildings will be used, how people will spill out and use these spaces, and then kind of undulated the planting through that, again, taking our cues from the existing building elevation or the new building elevation elements to be able to create a very simple but organized and elegant treatment for the landscape design. The planters also serve as the primary stormwater treatment component, so there was some good integration with how the civil engineer and the architect are bringing the water down into the plaza. So those planters were coordinated with those efforts to make it quite successful. You'll see that we have these sort of patterns of paving here. The neutral colors, the pebble color, which is sort of the beige color there. We have accent pavers that go through this area here. So that we're picturing, we're not showing furniture right here. We know that would be coming, but we see that as kind of the primary sunny spot, and that was kind of populated with these paving accent pieces to help kind of create the community space and help define that along with the building volume that wraps around there. The water feature itself has a water source here, which will animate and help provide some sound within that space. The balance of the water wall will actually just cascade over that edge and will create a focal point that you'll see as you come through the building arcade. And then it'll also be an element which helps to enhance the existing building entry experience here, as well as being something you see as you move around on the upper levels of the building here. So we kind of see that as a nice jewel within the center of the courtyard. Those are the primary things. I'd be happy to discuss any questions you have.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. I think that there are projects that come before us that are really challenging, and there's a lot of comment and discussion about them. And I think this is a really elegantly crafted and really well done building. And the refinements that you've added, these subtleties that have been adjusted here are something I'm comfortable with. And I really don't have a lot of comment today other than to say that I appreciate the quality and the character that you brought forward, and I'm prepared to move this project forward today. So thank you.
Board Member Liu.
So I do want to thank the applicant for making the changes. I think they're all headed in the right direction. I think that the general partie of the building is good. It seems like it's compromised because of the existing Equinox building, but that's where you are, and very much looking forward to seeing this whole new building being excavated around the existing Equinox building. I think this is going to be quite a sight. I think generally the massing of the building is very good. I think there's been a lot of criticism of some of the recent buildings, and this one I think is you've done a couple things that are good. Is you have like the portal through the building, through the middle of the site. You also have the arcade, and then also your upper floors are stepping back. And then also you've distinguished the residential from the commercial, so you're sort of making it look like you're breaking up the materials and the massing, so it looks like smaller chunks. It's not quite so massive and blocky. And then I think the other important thing is all the sunshades and your like railings and the balcony dividers also help give articulation and definition. It also gives like shade and shadow on the building, which are really very important. I like the overall concept of your aesthetics. I think that that whole section, that part of town has always been kind of a more industrial area because it used to be all like railroad sheds and the railroad spur and everything, and it has a kind of different character than the rest of the town. And I think you've picked up on that element, but you've also added like your wood panels and stuff to give it some richness and to give it a little bit more character. And I think this is all really good. I think that's it's like the really nice balance between there, and I think that the palette looks great. I did have a question for you. You do have stucco soffits and stuff like that, and I didn't look really carefully. I don't think I saw it there, or maybe there's a color chip or something, but I was just curious about all of those. Also, all the undersides of the arcades and the underside of the portal. You have the underside of the balconies, I think, is all stucco.
That's correct. And there's a color on there for the precast concrete, and the thought is that it would be a very similar value to that. So yeah, the one, that's correct. So when you've got the precast concrete spandrels, for instance, at the perimeter of the balcony,
right,
then the soffit underneath it would be, it's just, from a construction standpoint, we had to make that transition.
Right. So you're not trying to make it different. You're just trying to have it blend in as best as can.
Correct.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So I have a whole bunch of detailed questions though. So for staff, I did have a question about the acoustics. And so I know on other projects, there's been issues on El Camino with residential private open space, and sort of mitigating the noise of the street on the private open space. And these guys have a mixture of like open balconies, and then some of them are like solid railings. And so I was wondering what study was done there, because I didn't see anything in the environmental analysis.
So it wouldn't be part of the environmental because it's not subject to CEQA, but in terms of meeting the comp plan policy of trying to mitigate noise, the applicant has, and they could probably speak to it more eloquently than I can, but looking at the orientation of the balconies and the solid nature of the flooring and how deep they are, there may be, if you're standing right at the railing, there may be some noise issue, but obviously no matter how solid those were, if you're standing in front of the railing, the railing's not going to block the noise. But as you move further back in these deep balconies, the noise levels coming from the street going up is hitting the underside, and basically the balconies themselves block the noise that comes up towards them. So because they're so deep, there are spaces on the outdoor balconies that you do get that respite from the louder noise. I don't know if Heather wants to kind of go into any greater detail, but just looking at these, it doesn't seem like they're going to be incredibly impacted by noise because of how deep they are. There will be areas on those balconies that they'll have kind of that quieter space.
Okay, great, thank you. And then, Heather, was there any other thoughts about the open space? Great.
We had talked before.
Excellent. Great, thank you. I think the plan set at the moment really doesn't have any, even though you're showing lots of detail in the drawings, so we don't have details, so we don't have like window details, we don't have any of the sunshade details. I think you've got a number of them. You have one like on the corner of Portage and El Camino, that you have sunshades in the arcade. And I'd be concerned about how those are coordinated with the street trees and stuff. They're projecting out. And I think it's important to project out. But I'd be concerned about that with the trees. Also, on the upper floors, you have various sunshades and cornices. So we don't have any details for those. Normally, we look at, have some details. We ask for details where there are big material changes or whatnot. And so, also, we don't have any lighting photometrics or cut sheets. And let's see. And I think that's all. Oh, and then I think on some, on important things like the portal, your main archway. I mean, on some other projects that have come through, sometimes I've asked for like a reflected ceiling plan where it's really important. Like that's the main entranceway, and I just want to make sure that all that the underside of the building gets designed well too. And so I don't think we have anything. I think it's showing just in section. So maybe like a reflected ceiling plan there. On the landscape, Gary, I think I like the changes, all the changes that you've made. I think the paving and the planting is all looking good. I would encourage you to maybe add one more layer of plants or a little bit more variety in some of the raised planters if you can. I don't object to anything that you're showing, but let's just say, for example, I think you're showing lavender in the arcades in the planter there. And to me, lavender looks great for a few months of the year, and then the rest of the year, the English lavender, it's not much to look at. And that's right on the sidewalk, and that's in probably the most public space, where the restaurant users and the public are going to see it. So I would encourage you to either balance it with other plants that are similar to it, or I'm not opposed to something that's more high maintenance and high water use plants there as either way. But I think that this that particular location I think could be better. And I think some of the other ones, I think in the courtyard, I think you're showing Japanese maples and asparagus ferns, and I really like the choices that you made there. It's bright green contrasting against the gray palette. I think is really beautiful. I think you'd have even more accent plants too. I don't know if they would do well with the building drainage in there, but I'm looking at places I don't know, what is it, 800 High Street has, near the Whole Foods, it has very beautiful planters there. Or if you Carmel, you go there, just really very beautiful planting palettes. And I'm thinking of along that lines. It's more high maintenance. I don't know if the building owners are willing to maintain that kind of level of thing. But I think I'm interested in seeing that because I think most of the trees that you're showing on the street trees are all deciduous, I think. And so there's a certain point at the time of year where really all of those planters are, that's going to be the only green around the building. So I think that they have to look great. Also, Gary, on your previous scheme, you had shown some vines. I think there's bougainvillea and something else, and then they're not in this set of drawings. And I was wondering, where were you originally thinking about vines, and where did they go? If there was was there important location? And I asked because the existing Equinox has vines growing along the acacia side. They're all gone. And this is it's a huge maintenance issue, but.
When the building was repainted.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I think we simplified and basically pulled the vine approach out because we've got more detail within the planters themselves and as well as within the architecture. So we didn't really see a need to sort of hide or soften so much because there were some nice expressions going on in the elevations. So we were kind of good with that.
Okay. And then Gary, in like your landscape images, you're showing a lot of things, a lot of nice looking things that don't necessarily, I'm not sure I saw them in the plans, but like the light, like you have like a plaza light pole. And was this like for the court, were you thinking of that like for the courtyard? Or is that somewhere?
That was for the courtyard, that's right. We were looking at having a single light fixture here that would be able to broadcast light into this plaza area, as well as illuminate the fountain and actually do a little bit of a wash on the building. Wherever we have planters, we have the opportunity to be able to do some subtle built-in lights that would kind of give a flush of light at the base of the planter walls. But in this area here, where it's more open, there we go. We're thinking we could have a downlight sort of effect with sort of a recessed fixture that would both be non-glare, but would also create sort of a theatrical feel within that plaza area. And as you mentioned, that's something that we could look at photometrically and give you some more feedback on that.
Yeah, I think the idea is great, and then I think my concern is that this is just the photometrics, because it seems like the courtyard is fairly small, or it's long and linear, and then I'd just be concerned just that if you have with how that light and it works with the residents.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we want to have a hidden light source, so that the plaza just sort of glows without having glare. And the difficulty of showing any sort of pole light is you're saying, oh, there's this object, and looking at it critically, it's like, well, the intent really is for that to disappear and just to have the light come down. And so we're looking to have that dialed into the building metal colors and have it placed in a way that's really appropriate relative to the elevation, so that it becomes sort of a non-element and the light just happens, and it's a beautiful space to be in because of how it's lit.
Okay, good. And then you have another detail, which is like a counter top, which I think you're showing is
that
in the arcade?
Top?
Yeah, and
Yes.
I think you had a different version in your last set.
That's right.
Facing El Camino. And I was wondering how does that work? And then my question would also be, is that, like, I can see that being a nice thing.
So that
elsewhere, I mean, depending on the location. And then when I think about like all the noise on El Camino, then I'm thinking, are people actually going to use it that way in that location? And then also, I think you're showing metal, and then I think some of the plans are calling out for wood. And so I was wondering what your thoughts were about that, and how you integrate the planter with this counter in the arcade, and how that all gets
right.
detailed.
So in our previous submittal, we had a different photograph, which generated some conversation too, which caused us to think about, well, how would this actually be used? And going back to your lavender comment as well, is that we wanted to have sort of a short time duration bar that would occur in the arcade facing El Camino. What we've done is we've actually pulled that back a little bit, set it back a little bit so that it's kind of inboard of the colonnade, and then we've put the lavender planter in the foreground of that, maintaining the full width of the sidewalk there, because we didn't want to compromise the width of the sidewalk. You'll actually see that there's a grating that occurs below the counter there. We're thinking again that was kind of a way to be able to sit at the counter and not actually have your legs in the lavender. There is a grade differential that happens at that in those locations in many of the spots. So there's what we've done is we sort of elevated that seating so that when you're sitting down at that bar height, you're more on an eye-to-eye level with the people who are walking by in El Camino, which we think is a more comfortable relationship rather than sitting down below and having people look down on you as you walk by. So we like that sort of elevated countertop kind of experience, and you're right. Some people may not want to have that experience, and that's why we have the additional seating that's kind of off of El Camino back against the building facade. So we have the cafe seating there, and people can kind of choose which kind of experience if they want to have more of a people watching, more of an engaged kind of experience. They can be out there in the counter. If they want to have a little bit more privacy or setback, they can be against the building.
And then is there a particular restaurant operator in mind for the location? Like, is the bar counter really? I mean, we're proposing this to be a permanent part of the building.
Yes.
And then is that working with the tenants?
With the building program, that's right. There's intended to be food uses there, so that's what we were thinking. In terms of the materiality, we were thinking about, the countertop itself, whether it be wood or metal or some sort of composite material. We did want to have something that was going to be pretty durable, because we think that will be a pretty high use area. And we considered doing wood, but we felt like that might be more of a maintenance issue and not quite so good from a food service standpoint. So thinking either a metal or a composite type material that related more to the concrete elements of the architecture would be most appropriate.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think wood is just too high maintenance for that location. And then metal, you have the issue of, it's in the sun. So it's an interesting issue. Okay, and then maybe could you remind me of the grade change difference there at the arcade? I know that the
Sure.
slate, I understand that the general way the slide is sloping, but how much difference is there between the arcade and the sidewalk?
It varies.
Yeah.
So it's actually, what happens is that the arcade area that turns in here, we're level. And then El Camino drops as
Right.
it comes down here. And then, so Portage down here is low. And so we have a stair that occurs
Got
right
it.
here at the interface of the arcade and the dining terrace. And so there is a grade change that occurs along this edge here. So rather than having kind of a lip there, that was another, having the bar there was kind of a nice way of keeping that from becoming a tripping hazard. So we've sort of dealt with the grade, either having it directly level coming in on the arcade or stepping up at the stairs down here where there's enough vertical to create a real stair without that's appropriate for that grade change.
Okay. So at the corner then is maybe it's like 3 steps or like 2? It's probably like about 4 steps. Like 4, so it's about 2 feet or just roughly less. Okay, that's fine.
I'm sorry.
I don't think I would want anything more than that, but I think that's fine.
And then we were able to incorporate a seat wall into this portion of this area here. We were sort of looking for opportunities to be able to help activate El Camino without decreasing the actual sidewalk width. So we were able to work the seat wall into that face. And then there's a sort of a wood railing element that happens back at the dining patio, so that there is a nice separation there. So again, if you're sitting at that seat wall, you're not feeling like people are looking over your shoulder, and just trying to make that as comfortable as it could be.
Okay. Great, thank you, Gary.
Sure.
And then Heather, I just one last question two questions for you. One is, I think we mentioned this last time, which was your typical balcony railing. Like it looks great in the 3D drawings, and then the detail is has a very heavy profile. Like it's not, you're showing a tapering.
Oh.
And I know it's not quite as tapered because you have structure. I was wondering if I realize that, you have to do what's structurally necessary, but it seems like that concrete, the precast concrete piece, could have more detail or something, or shape or whatnot. And I was wondering if you have to come back to us with a lot of details, and I was wondering if you could show us that. So I like the profile of that, but that's the detail is just showing something much.
A little deeper, yeah.
It looks a lot deeper to me. And I was just wondering if you could come up with options for us for that. If you can't get that, that shape looks great to me, but it seems like if you can't get that with the detail, structural detail, which I'm seeing in here, maybe there's some other options.
Oh, we are challenging our structural engineer.
Yeah.
You can see that there is a reveal in this larger concrete band, and that reveal is a natural wrap that turns into a curve as you go onto the balcony. We're probably going to have we definitely are going to have a construction joint at the bottom here where the precast turns into a soffit material. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by options here, but we are going to continue to try and refine it and coordinate with structure. And obviously we're trying very hard to create this look-ma, no hands, cantilevered balcony effect. I mean, there are no columns holding these up. And as I said, we're pushing our structural engineer as much as we can.
Okay. No, I think that's the right approach.
Okay.
I would say if you, okay, say the worst case scenario, if you actually have to build what's actually shown in the detail, then I would want it just, I think you should come back to us with an accurate rendering, because it's a very big part of the aesthetic of the building. And I think, no, I mean, I think you should try to get as thin as possible, but if it's, I just want to say, if it's this detail, then I want to see the renderings, or at least one of the renderings updated to be accurate. So,
I think that's completely reasonable. I mean, clearly there's some other items that you'll want us to come back as conditions of approval.
Great.
And we welcome that opportunity to check in and confirm that we're still headed in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay, and then I have two other things, two last things. One is the colors, and I was wondering if you can put colored elevations in the set, because I think that you're showing us things here that aren't in the set, and I haven't fully considered all the colors. I don't object to anything on the color board. I think it's all handsome.
Well, do most drawing sets include colors?
I'm saying just like the overall color layout of where you're putting all the colors on the building.
Like a block diagram?
Not necessarily a painting diagram, but I mean, like as I look at it here, we don't even really have we just have I think you're just conceptually describing things, and but there's no actual drawing that says this is generally the color scheme of the building. Okay. And that's unusual. I mean, that's unusual. We usually have some colored rendering, maybe not of every single facade, but some sort of layout. I mean, I don't have it. I think it's kind of unusual for us.
Okay. We actually, one of the reasons that we focus so much on the perspective renderings is because this is not a orthogonal straight box. And it's very difficult to understand the relationships of the material palette unless you see it in a more holistic manner. We're happy to put together drawings like that. I think these are actually much more helpful in envisioning the project.
I know, but it's just we didn't get any of this in our set. The thing, like the image that you're showing right now, this is the first time I've ever seen it. And
I understand.
Yeah, so that's the reason why. I mean, you could take all of these images and just include it as part of the packet. I would think would be fine if you don't have to, produce anything new. And I think all of these images are great. It's just that, I haven't seen them before, so I haven't really given them a lot of thought. They're here. Or where are they? They're in the back.
Well, some of them were in that ARB supplemental package that addressed the 9 issues point by point. Yes, yeah. And
I did see those.
And there was I actually included an apology because the colors for there were screenshots. And they're not as accurate as these are.
Yeah, because they came out so dark that I wasn't really sure what I was looking at.
We weren't as happy with those either. And actually that's one of the reasons, if you look at the images that are on the wall, those are not printed on the large format paper. They're printed on 11 by 17 and then attached to that. As you know, the image, the issue of reproduction is just...
I understand. I understand. Especially when you go dark. You don't get any subtlety of that.
No. Or from one computer to the next.
Okay. Okay, and then my last comment is, signage. It looks like you're trying to put signage on the corner, on the planters.
We are, I think, very clearly noting those as not included in this permit.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I understand. And then I think, though, you know, like I think on El Camino, I think most tenants are going to want to put something on the building.
Depending on the tenant, but any tenant who requests signage is going to be informed that it has to comply with the City of Palo Alto signing ordinance, and that they have to work with the owner as part of a holistic signage package.
I think that's fine. And then I think my main point, I just want to make one point, is that your corner, the glass corner on Portage and El Camino, I think, you know, we have like lots of Ken Hayes projects where it's really hard for the tenants to put signs on the buildings, and I think that this is a similar situation, where you have everything is glass and sunshade, and then there isn't really any place for like a wall sign or anything. So I would just keep that in mind when you're doing that. So thank you for this.
First of all, I want to thank you for coming back, for taking our comments and addressing them. I think you've done a really wonderful job here in terms of listening to what we had to say and being flexible enough to incorporate those in. This is really a much tighter proposal that you've put together here. Some of the elements that I previously saw that appeared a little disjointed, I think some of my colleagues also saw that, have been refined and address our concerns. And based on what I see here today, it's going to be very easy for me to go along with Board Member Pop in approving this. So I just want you to know that I really appreciate what you've done, and that because of what you've done here, it's easy to approve this project. There are a couple of issues that I wanted to bring up first. You know, I did have some concerns regarding the balconies and the slenderness of them, and I think rethinking those in terms of them, you've done a really great job. I'll tell you exactly where my concern was coming from. It took me a long time to identify it. I drove around the Cal Ave north of Page Mill Road area there, and looked at balconies with those apartments there, because in some ways the configurations are very similar when you get up above the first level, and a lot of those are really heavy balconies, and I really like those. Where I was reacting or coming from was at the building that Cafe Riachi is in, and that's a very difficult building to embrace. And so the slenderness of the balconies, I don't think, is particularly successful with that building, and so that's where that was coming from. It wasn't just sort of taken from just thin air. I think you've done a really great job with the balconies, and I think that the railings and the way you've expressed them, it works particularly well. I do have one minor concern, and maybe it can be addressed, and that's the corner of Acacia. And when you get up to the second level there, yes, right there, that view there, you've got that knife edge balcony you've got the two knife edges, and they both go in different directions there. Yet at the top of the building, you've taken a knife edge and you've sort of, with the cornice, have wrapped that around the building there. And then you have the sort of the lattice or trellis element that continues on over the second floor of the Acacia units as you get further down the block. And what I see is that maybe there's a way to take that trellis or lattice element and carry that between the second and the third story there, in terms of the bringing it around the corner and sort of finishing that element there. And my concern really is more not just aesthetic, but it's also from a functional point of view. You know, how are we shielding that? Because that's the northwest sort of direction, the west direction, and it's going to get maximum sunlight. You have any thoughts on that?
Very interesting observation. We, and it's hard to really see in this image because it's cutting all of this off. We had really seen the transition from the more solid cornice element to an open trellis as a transition from commercial office to residential. It's one of our signifiers. This is a particularly challenging corner because this is residential. And we'd been playing a lot with this transition from the beam to the cantilever and the beam to the cantilever, and you're absolutely right. There's some not quite followed through logic happening in this intersection that we should look at and think a little bit more about. There's a lot of conditions on the building. And so I agree. I think this could bear with a little more thought and integration.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, if it wasn't such a prominent corner,
Yeah.
you know, it probably wouldn't bother me as much. But it is one of the main elements as to how you see the building as you proceed down El Camino Real in a southerly direction.
Well, and as you know, I mean, you're all practicing architects. You know how this works. You work on a design. You have multiple sources of contribution to the project that have impacts on the project. And every time you go back to a certain area, you have an opportunity to look at it afresh and dig in a little bit more and see if there are more opportunities for refinement. And again, that's why we were particularly pleased with the outcome from our last meeting, is gave us a chance to go back and do some little tweaks. And I think that's part of the life of a project. Obviously, what we're really looking for from you is the approval to move it on to that next step so that we can continue through our entitlements process, not forgetting that this is imperfect. And we're constantly struggling towards a higher refinement and a higher level of completion. But that's a good point. We'll continue to look at that.
I think continuing the overhang the deck that you have around the corner of the building is a little too much.
Yeah.
It would definitely be too much. The trellis element, I think, is about right, but there are other solutions that you could probably come up with that would resolve that. And it's just, again, if it wasn't on such a prominent corner,
sure,
I probably would just sort of let it go at that. So so that's just something to think about.
Yeah, thanks for pointing it out.
On the acacia face, by the way, as you go further down, I like the way you've dealt with the transition there.
Yeah.
Rethinking that. And the only thing that, again, bothers me a little bit is the connectivity. How do you transition and go through the existing former pet food depot to get to the courtyard? I really want to go there from Acacia. It's not possible.
It is, but it's not at grade. So, for instance, when you are at grade here, you can see through the glass breezeway and over the building. You could go up to the third floor and go right through that portal, and you would be on the courtyard side. So the building exists. You can go over it, you can see through it, and you can go in front of it. Actually, you can go under it too, but that's not going to address your concern about being on Acacia.
I have one last thought with regard to that, because I know that I'm not gonna win on this. Okay, and it's relatively unimportant. whether you actually go through that building, but maybe to create and strengthen a back or side entrance to that building that comes off of Acacia. Whether it's used or not terribly important. It might even be used as an exit only. But the idea is to create that visibility and to be able to create, maybe between the Equinox building and the big Equinox building and the smaller former Pet Food Depot building, a side entrance there that maybe might be as much as a pair of glass doors or something that allows you to see through.
You currently can. They currently are glass doors that you see all the way through. Sorry, it's a floor-to-ceiling glass area. You completely see through that. But your comment about having more of a
connection,
sense of entry, because this is an entrance, having more of a sense of entry, again, is a good point. And we should think a little bit more about that as a message. There is a low wall here that is intended as a signage opportunity. It's low, it's discreet, it's at street level, but there could be a more significant clue to it being an entrance in that area. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I guess where I'm going is I can't have the actual connectivity, but I'd like to have the visual connectivity through if that's at all possible. It's just where I'm going.
Lee, could you clarify, are you actually saying there's the existing glass connection between the old Pet Food Depot and the big Equinox building? Or are you actually saying the back of the Pet Food Depot building, like a new, like within the Equinox, within the Pet Food Depot shell? Are you actually saying you want something through?
There is a 10-foot gap between Equinox, old Equinox, and the Equinox on El Camino. That's
Correct.
A glass covered connection. Completely glass.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I want more visual connection through that.
Okay.
In other words, it's blocked at the street. There's no sense of entry there.
That's correct. There are plants proposed for that area. It's proposed as a green zone.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking at is that you have to sort of like zigzag through.
Yes, we were challenged with the need for a transformer, which you can see here, and the desire to provide a pet-friendly zone here, and we were also challenged with some grade issues. The floor of Equinox back here is approximately 3 feet higher than our grade condition here, and we tried to turn that into an opportunity to provide that pet-friendly area and more grade landscape, actual landscape. I can appreciate that our solution doesn't address all of your goals. I can appreciate that.
Okay. Okay, going around to the Portage side of the building. I'm sorry. Let's go back to El Camino Real.
Oh.
I like what you've done at the portal, above the portal, how you've reorganized the windows there.
Which corner? A Portage corner or Acacia?
I'm sorry, El Camino Real. I went too
sorry.
far. I forgot that.
I just got to get to the right spot. There.
Yeah, right
Okay.
there.
Yeah, we were very excited about bringing that terracotta down and making it a 2-story zone.
Can you talk a little bit about what's going on above there?
Well, this again is that fire separation joint between the two buildings. And so you've got a third floor office and a fourth floor residential. There's matte terracotta, ribbed terracotta, and matte terracotta again. And you've got the concrete, precast concrete panel at the top and the bottom. And then you transition to the board form concrete, and then the matte and ribbed gray terracotta, and then the precast balcony and the terrace here for the offices, and then the balconies, and then the fourth floor terraces for the residential.
And how is the portal being lit? Can you go through that?
There will be a number of downlights in the soffit. There'll also be fire sprinklers. The planters, as Gary mentioned, are great opportunities for some uplighting. And one of the elements that I think he described in the landscape plan was these darker elements are actually cubic seat stones. And we're looking at a detail where the bottom of the seat stone is also a glowing a glow source for lighting.
Yeah, I'm not a really big proponent on downlights, particularly in outside uses. Is there a way to provide more uplight, either by, well, let's go back to the elevation that you have.
Sure.
All the excitement on the El Camino Real face of the building happens really out almost at the street facade, out at the street area. Everything is proud. Remember, we talked about this last time, and we were talking about this as an arcade very similar to, and I think I used the example of Victorio Emanuel. Where this element, I think, falls short is that I want this to be an exciting element to pull you through the building complex. And so with the downlights, what happens oftentimes is, you've got the recessed downlights, and of course, as you know, the ceiling goes dark. I think the opportunity here is to have some sort of element either floating in there that uplights, or to begin to get something on the walls that focuses up, so that you get a more of a even illumination, as you transition through that space. The reason I'm saying this is that we're looking at this as being a accessory space for the dining and for people to congregate and hang out. At nighttime, the sky is dark. This pulls you in at night. And then when you get on the other side there, because it's an open courtyard, again, that would be dark sky. So I'm looking at some other element in here that's going to just pull you right in off of El Camino Real.
Those are good observations. We've been focusing on three elements: the succulent wall at the very end, the Ipe tower here, and then the glass stair circulation tower there. In your far distance, to bring you all the way into the courtyard. But I think what you're addressing, which is very interesting, is a more short-term focal point, and having an element in this area that provided an opportunity to create evening illumination, and also to provide that short-term attraction before you reached these goals that are in the courtyard, I think that's a good observation.
I'm going to ask my colleagues here, we have a short board here which requires that we all be present during the public hearing. I have a family emergency. If we could take a 5-minute recess, I would really appreciate it. Information on that element. Let's go around to the portage side. I think what you've done with regard to the roll-up doors there and the ramp there, I think is really great. It really cleans up that area. It was a little disjointed. I like what you've done on the second floor there in terms of the louvers and bringing them down to the same opening as what's up above. It bothers me a little bit that the roll-up door is offset and the other door is offset, but not as much as what you had previously. So I think that this is a big improvement there. Mr. Lehman, could you just talk a little bit about your fountain? Fountains are I think, very interesting elements.
I'd love to. If I could bring a couple more images up that could be passed around. So what we see is the fountain is sort of this linear bar that has this one focal point in it where the water would be elevated, and we would have a change in material. Actually, I'm going to step up to the dais just to... Thank you. So we're thinking that the majority of the fountain is done in this smooth, polished material, and that the water source, the cube that is shown on axis with that paving band, would be this brushed material, so that that vertical face would trace and come up and down, picking up with the movement of the band, and that we're exploring the possibility of actually incorporating this type of material into that band. Right now we have it shown as an interlocking paving stone with a dark charcoal color. In a perfect world, we'd love to be able to afford to do this and take this material all the way across, so we're sort of exploring that. So the idea is that the bar is wet continuously across the top. It has some very subtle water jets that water the entire length of the bar, and then there's one point where the cube occurs where the water is raised up, and that's where you get the animated sound, and that's where the material change occurs. So I think it's a really fun piece.
So to get the idea, it's only a water surface. It's not a there's no depth to the water to the pool.
The pool is very shallow. Yeah, no more than an inch. Except for at the place where the more activated water surface is, and then it would be set down a little bit to contain the water. So there's a little bit of a reveal that happens at the more activated water source, but the rest of it is more a reflecting pool that then sheets down the vertical face.
And where does does it sheet down all the way around?
All the way around, that's right.
All the way around. So it's going to appear as a water cube?
It will
water rectangle.
It'll be more like this, except for rather than having this faceted facade here, it would be smooth with the polished surface going down the vertical face. So it's a very quiet kind of piece here, and then the simple activated water at that one cube.
Very, very exciting piece. And then the water would disappear at the pebbles.
Drops down into the cobble, and it's recirculated underneath. Yeah.
So there'll be pebbles at the base, just like you've got here.
Yeah. So you'll have this shows a very narrow cobble. That cobble will be a little wider. We'll pick up on what's happening in the planters as well.
Great. Very, very exciting. I think that's going to be a very successful piece. And I think I think this is great. I'm gonna support the project. Do we have you have some additional comments here? Okay, one more comment, Board Member Pop.
Yeah, so Gary, thank you very much for sharing the extra images of the fountain. Based on the image that was in the package, I was satisfied, but now that I've seen that, I have a comment for you about that, and that is that the grout lines that I'm seeing between the joints of the panels that are on the top are very distracting. And you know what's beautiful about this is it's this very smooth surface of water with just the ripples, and it's black on black, and it's very elegant and sleek. And the version of it that you showed us is not so much. And I think if you're going to do that, the grout should really match the material rather than contrast.
It's a good comment. I think that's what we'll do.
Okay, so with that, I need two things. I need to have a motion for to make a recommendation, and then also we have to act on the DEE. So, do I have a maker of the motion?
Yes, because I think you two are on board. Okay. Yes, I think you two should.
Go ahead. Okay, I will give this a try. I will move to approve recommendation of the project as proposed, and my elements that I think should return to the subcommittee are simply on the acacia side, the continuation of the how shall we say, trellis or
Cornice?
well, it's not really a cornice, it happens mid-level. So it's a how to continue that element around the building, the projecting element around the corner on acacia.
Could you clarify, that's the second, it's actually the third?
It is the third floor,
floor.
but it's the second floor of the
Elevation.
Elevation
Got it.
there, because it's a commercial project. It's a two-story commercial building. Or is it a one-story?
At the corner, it's a double height space.
Right,
But
that's what I thought.
when you go further down, it's 4 floors.
Right, and what I'm talking about is it's above the double height space. Between the double height space and what we would consider to be the third floor. How do we continue? Go to the other view from El Camino.
Oh, the El Camino side.
Yeah. Yeah, right there.
Right here?
No, the next.
Right
there.
there.
Yeah.
That.
It would be between the third and fourth floor.
It's the 4th floor, the articulation of the 4th floor slab as it hits the perimeter wall.
Well captured. Thank you very much.
Okay?
Okay. So that needs to be looked at. The second element is at the El Camino Real portal, the lighting in that area. And then those were my only comments. I think that you've done a great job. I need a second on that.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other comments or concerns?
Would you mind referring to the record of land use section that's attached?
I'm sorry.
And the findings therein for the DEE.
Well, do you want us to do that separately?
I think in your motion, you just need to recognize that the motion includes the 2 DEEs. You don't need to do the DEs as a separate approval.
Okay, so included
you're
in my
inclined to approve them.
motion includes the record of land use as well as the design enhancement exception. Is that okay with you, Mr. Pop? Please say yes.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, with that, we will vote on this. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Me.
Okay. So that goes down, it's 2, 1, and 1 abstention, and 1 absent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So with that, we have subcommittee, but we don't have...
Can we, sorry, I'm just, I did get Aaron to come down as he was able to just do a bit of, I know we already handled item 1, but I just thought there might be an opportunity for you to ask some direct questions and just, because I did cover about the RFP and who we're about to recommend to council to hire for that, but...
Okay, so maybe Claire wants to rejoin us. She's in the lobby. Yeah. No, she's here. While we're getting the chair to rejoin us, we'll take a quick 2-minute break.
And I understand we have some staff presentations.
Yes, and thank you, and good morning, everyone. Aaron Ackman, I'm the Interim Planning Director. I believe Amy already touched on some of the issues related to the downtown development cap in terms of scheduling, but in September, we'll either the first or second meeting in September, we'll go to the council for approval of a contract with Diet & Bhatia. They're a well-known planning firm. To do phase 1 of the downtown development cap. And the downtown development cap has been broken into 2 phases. The first one is an existing and projected conditions analysis. So basically taking a look at parking conditions in the immediate downtown area as well as the residential areas that surround it, how it is now, given current conditions, what will it be like in 5 and 10 years. What we've also asked them to do, and we asked them to beef up this portion of their proposal, is to do some actual scientific polling of downtown businesses to find out what is the actual employee density within office areas within the downtown, and then also to figure out what is the actual mode share. How are people actually getting into these buildings? We all know that there's, well, first we all know that there's a lot of commercial intrusion into the residential neighborhoods. I think there's a general recognition at a staff, at a council, at a commission level, as well as at a neighborhood level, that is occurring at levels that it hasn't occurred in the past. But what also is occurring is transit ridership at higher levels than it ever has been. Palo Alto has the number 2 ridership train station. The only one that's a larger ridership is at 4th and King in San Francisco. What's also interesting is this all came about as a result of a 1986 study. That was when the downtown development cap went into place. And I looked at a poll that they did at that time, and only 1% of people who worked in downtown were taking the train in. So obviously there's been an increase in the amount of train ridership since then. But so that's going to be the first phase, really taking a look at this existing conditions and projected conditions. Second phase, I would say probably go out, in about 6 months from now, and that will actually be the policy recommendation phase. And that's when we look at things like, what should the parking ratio be? Should we work towards establishing some type of transportation management association for the downtown area or citywide, so we could really take a look at broader issues of how people are getting in and out of town? Because I think anyone who has anyone that studies planning knows that just providing more parking isn't the answer, because for each parking space that you provide, that's another driver who's coming in to the area. So an increased amount of parking is going to ultimately lead to an increased amount of congestion. So I think it's going to be a balanced approach to ultimately, and something that comes out of the existing conditions analysis, the projected conditions analysis, and ultimately the policy analysis phase. So I don't know, that's just a 2-minute overview, and I don't know if anyone has any particular questions.
I think the dilemma here is really entrenched in planning and transportation. The issue is that when you deal with land use and density, if you don't deal with the transportation element, then you wind up with unwanted automobiles and parking. So I honestly believe that part of that a missing component from that puzzle is transportation demand management.
Yep.
And that's a really important element in terms of how you begin to look at the whole picture. If we're able to make it difficult for people to drive and park in downtown Palo Alto, they will find other ways to do that. And one of the simplest ways of going about doing that is putting in what's called market rate parking. Because then it becomes looking at what the cost is for driving to the downtown. And then saying to yourself, well, if I take the train, I take the bus, I can be there, and it's not going to cost me as much. And there needs to be incentives for people to do that. It's not the density by itself. It's what the flip side of that is, which is really I guess the driving element, you know, the parking element that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, at a staff level, I agree with you 100%. I think, you know, one thing that's important to understand is when the downtown development cap was put into place in the mid-'80s, there was about 3.5 million square feet of non-residential development in the downtown area. And the development cap allowed for about 10% growth, so about 350,000 square feet of additional non-residential space to be built. So we've reached about that 2/3 mark, about 235,000 square feet. But the impacts related to parking and traffic have obviously increased more than 10% in that time. So a lot of this has to do with how existing buildings that have been there for decades are being used and how people are getting to those areas, more so than even that incremental amount of development that's been built in the last 2 decades. So I agree with you. I mean, free parking probably is the #1 driver to people coming to an area and deciding to drive their automobiles rather than taking some other. So first you have to, I think, overall not make it so easy to take your automobile, but then on the flip side, what you've said, Board Member Lippert, is provide incentives so that it is easier to take alternative modes into downtown in Palo Alto in general.
While I totally agree with Board Member Lippert's position on this, I think that the challenge, of course, is that unless you create a zone around the downtown where it's impossible for people to spill over, making it more difficult to park downtown just pushes people farther out. And until we can come up with a methodology that's tolerable for the residents and manageable for the city and budgets and all of those things, I think we're really struggling here. And I'll bring up the drum that I beat all the time about this because it's what happens around my office, and that is that while we're experiencing a huge influx into the area, people riding Caltrain, there are also a huge number of people who ride Caltrain out of this area. And I can tell you right now that on my block, there are 2 things that go on. One is we get Caltrain riders parking their cars early in the morning and staying, you know, those cars sit there all day long and then they leave at the end of the day, and so there's literally no parking on my street. It used to be from about 7:30 in the morning till about 4:30 in the afternoon. And what's happening now because of the Lytton development is that entire block fills up at 6:30 in the morning with contractors' trucks. And there's not a single place for anyone to park in the area because of that. And so there's this combination of other elements that are driving serious issues in the downtown. And you know, it's so complicated to deal with all of this stuff because there are so many different pieces and elements to consider. But I think that you just have to make it so difficult to park anywhere else that people have to take the train, and you have to make it so difficult to park anywhere else that it makes it possible for people who come and go just for an hour or 2 to have an opportunity to be able to come to our downtown and spend their money and shop and enjoy Palo Alto the way we're hoping everyone will.
Just to respond to that, we're not going to wait around for the downtown development cap to be done to bring forward some type of residential permit parking program within the surrounding downtown area. We've had a series of meetings with downtown adjacent neighborhoods. We're going to have It's kind of hard to nail down 2 dates within September to have the council chambers booked, but that's what we're doing right now so that we could once again meet with the downtown neighborhoods. But that's exactly, that's what we're going to aim for, where there's, we allow people who live in the area to have a space, somewhere on their block near their home, while also allowing a balanced amount of commercial intrusion into the neighborhood through some type of permitting system. There's a lot of details that have to be worked out, but I think that's generally the direction that we're moving in. And the good side effect of that is that you will force some people to make some transportation decisions because that free parking isn't going to be so plentiful.
Are you studying increased parking at the Caltrain lots as you're studying other locations for potential lots? Because it seems like Palo Alto is paying a pretty heavy burden for what would be something that seems to be appropriate for Caltrain to be supporting versus us putting our dollars into parking for that.
Yeah, we looked at, as part of a garage study, we looked at 5 lots, and one of the lots was a Samtrans owned on Urban Lane, and that actually got the best bang for our buck in terms of, because sometimes it's hard to fit with ramps to fit into a smaller lot, so that was a big enough lot to where you could use a ramp system to have a lot of parking within there. So that was one of the lots that we took a look at.
So it's great that maybe I didn't represent this the right way. What I'm suggesting is that it seems to me that Palo Alto building lots for Caltrain riders isn't the right approach to spending our dollars, that we should be perhaps working with Caltrain to say, listen, there are so many people riding from this station and coming and going that you need more parking here and you need to build a lot. In conjunction with things that we're doing within the city, that should maybe be considered as well.
Good idea.
I just had a question on process. So, is the study that you're doing being reviewed by the PTC as part of like an ongoing? Is it like an ongoing project that you would report to them, or what happens?
We haven't worked out all the details, but there will certainly be a lot of PTC involvement, community meeting involvement, and ultimately some type of steering committee that's formed. So in the beginning of the overall process, it's more of a data collection type process, and so there's not going to be as much commission involvement at that point. There'll probably be an initial check-in meeting, but yeah, the commission's most likely going to be the main meeting. We'd be happy to have a check-in with the ARB just to let you know what's going on and update you and hear any concerns that you may have. Then we'll have community-wide meetings as well as the stakeholder group. I mean, it's a pretty big deal. I mean, this is the first time in 25, almost 30 years that we've undertaken some type of downtown study. So there'll be a lot of community involvement.
I just wanted to make one other quick comment, which is that when you go to many cities that have residential parking permit programs, you see that the streets are virtually empty. It's meant for the residents only. You need to have a sticker, or you need to have something on your vehicle in order to park in that neighborhood. I think that that's detrimental, equally as detrimental as well. What we're talking about here is how do you manage the parking? How do you create opportunities for people to park on the street and to make it equitable so that, for instance, people who are making deliveries or people who are have business in the neighborhood can also park there. So I think that that's a reasonable request here in terms of making on-street parking available to people that are going to go to board member Pop's office to meet with so that his clients can meet with him. That's really what his gripe or is here. So I think that needs to be identified. My neighborhood, I live in downtown North. I can literally go down the street and I can count the number of high-end automobiles, Teslas, Mercedes, BMWs, that are parked there. And people are not going to park on the street if it isn't safe. And when people are willing to put such an expensive vehicle on the street, it makes my neighborhood safe. And so I think that that's really an important aspect to this, is we want people to park in the neighborhoods, but we don't want them to park there all day long. We want an investment there, but we don't want them to hog all the parking spaces. So.
And then I'm sure you're doing this, but you need to have some input from the business community downtown, because they have a vested interest in people being able to park to do their business and go to the restaurants, etc. So something needs to be worked out for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, that looks like all. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. I believe there's